So last week I had the pleasure of speaking with Nick from Nick Exposed. If y'all haven't checked out his YouTube channel, I highly suggest that you give it a look. And without further ado, let's go ahead and dive right on into the interview.
Cool. Well, I've started out here. I've got some questions written down. And I just watched your video about conversations again, having conversations within photography. And that makes me think a lot of how I shoot, because I rarely take photographs anymore, like at all. I really need to have seen it beforehand and had that conversation, so to speak, with the piece.
Sure.
If I don't know anything about what I'm about to shoot, I'm not even going to shoot it.
Yeah.
One of the most common questions I get is, how do I shoot action sports? I want to shoot skateboarding. It's like, well, do you skateboard? They're like, no. Have you watched skateboarding? They're like, no. Have you been to a skate park? No. So like, how could you really shoot something unless you have that intimate conversation with it? So I highly suggest for anybody that's watching this to check out that video, because that was deep. I really, really enjoyed that. And talking about like surface conversations, the snapshot. Do you take a lot of snapshots, or is that not as much of a thing for you anymore?
No, I do. You know, I kind of photograph on multiple different levels into, you know, if we use the conversational language, and for anybody who hasn't seen that video, to kind of break it down into a very quick nutshell, is there's the surface level conversation where you see somebody and you go, hey, how you doing? Oh, good. And then that's it, you know, and that's what you're talking about, is the snapshot. And then there's the going a little bit deeper, and then there's the intimacy of truly knowing someone. And when we apply that over to photography, it's not a bad thing to take snapshots. You know, I like documenting things just to be able to remember that thing. You know, it doesn't need to be the most eloquent photo, but to at least have a visual document of it. But then when I go into my projects, you know, that's a completely different thing, to where I'm wanting to dive into the intimacy that you're talking about and that you're bringing up. So I do take the snapshots, and you know, lately I've actually been taking a little bit more of the snapshots, just because we are in quarantine, and it's kind of the way that I've been approaching, just visually documenting just random things throughout the day. But for my big projects, it's the intimacy.
There was one thing that came to mind talking about surface conversations like that it doesn't necessarily always have to be looked at as that. You can take it to that next level of allowing that spontaneity. So quick inspiration, which sometimes comes in those snapshots. Like I see that in some of your work, where you'll be walking, I'm sure, and you see the light. And I see these same things sometimes. I'll see the light and be like, and I immediately think of you. I don't shoot a lot of that stuff, so I'll be like, oh, Nick would love that.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
Normally for me, it's tough, because the light's changed by the time I get my 4x5 set up and everything. So I often don't capture those things. But the spontaneity of things like that is a beautiful thing. So that would be one thing to try to not discourage people from shooting the snapshots, but to just have that thought behind the photos, and to probe those little questions, and you know, and learn about your subject. Which is especially applicable towards anything that you don't know about, or anything that's new for you. So yeah, again, thank you for that. That was great.
Yeah.
How'd you first get into photography?
Yeah, so for me, it was a transition. You know, I started off drawing as a kid. I was a very artistic child, and was constantly drawing anime and cartoons and cars and literally anything and everything. I was doing, you know, drawings of self-portraits, and there's something just beautiful to the graphite hitting the paper, the monochromatic aspect there. And then, you know, over time, I went from that to, I was doing web design just out of high school. A little bit after high school, switched over from a corporate job that I was working over to starting my own web design company. And then it turned out that my clients needed more graphic design than they did web design. So I transitioned over to the graphic design section, and I did that for about 5 or 9 years. And in that, you know, when you're designing different flyers for people, or even when in the web design, people needed photos. So, you know, slowly but surely I started getting into photo work, mostly just getting images to go into the flyers. They weren't anything, you know, artistic. They were just enough to to be able to make the flyers that I was making for people. And then ironically, I came across HDR, which was kind of my introduction into like actually getting to know a camera and having to learn what is bracketing and these different things. And then shortly after that, the kind of conversation on dynamic range brought me over to film, and realizing that film really carries such a broad range. So in 2011, 2012, I started diving into the film realm. So 2010, I think, was about the first time that I started into the HDR kind of thing. So 2010, 11, and then I started transitioning back over into maybe a more artistic stream of photography, in my sense. HDR can be very artistic for individuals, but I found my niche more in black and white and kind of making artistic statements that way.
Did you take a college course, or how did you first, because a lot of people will be scared to develop that first roll of film. It's scary.
Oh yeah.
You value those images so much, and when it comes out blank, that sucks.
Yeah. No,
So did you take
that.
a college course, or what was it that prompted you to be like, hey, I can do this at home?
Yeah, it was mostly the encouragement of the community. You know, as I got to know different people within the film community, it brought me more and more to people going, why are you sending out to a lab? You should just do it at home. It's so much easier than you probably make it out to be. So I was exactly in that boat of, I was scared. So I took a role of, it was probably like Tri-X or something, and I just went out and took crappy images. Like I was like, I don't want to be terrified to lose these things. So I'm pretty sure I put it in a point and shoot and just started like shooting off just to give myself a test roll to be able to develop, and jumped into it, got all the chemistry. I think I probably watched Ted Forbes video on how to develop. Oh, and Matt Day. Both of those guys had some videos that I dove into, and just took the steps and made it work. And it came out wonderfully the first time. Then I had to go into the next thing of going, okay, then now how do I get this onto the computer? So ended up finding a scanner at a thrift store for like $5. Just this old Epson. Made that work. And yeah, you go on a journey. You know, it's different for everyone. Some people will learn in a college course. Other people, it's just grassroots. You just got to kind of dive in, make some mistakes throughout the way. I made plenty of mistakes, bubbles in the chemistry and not shaking it, too much shaking, you know, not gauging the temperature of things. And you just allow all those things to inform you as you move forward. So kind of the school of hard knocks is my my way of diving into the whole thing.
All right. Yep. I just turned 31, and I was thinking
nice.
about when did I develop my first roll of film? It was in 2004. So it was a while back. High school darkroom photography. But the thing I was blessed is to have learned that, and then to learn printing at the same time, because they're so important. Like, how would you make the negative and not make a print?
Sure.
It just it feels like this final step that's being skipped here for a lot of people. So I wanted to talk a little bit about print, and maybe you could tell us your relationship with print, and if print is something that's important to you. And
I think it's extremely important, you know, otherwise your images, there's the old saying of don't allow your images to die as JPEGs kind of thing. And, you know, it took me a while before the darkroom was another scary step for me, you know, and it wasn't until a couple years back that I made this step, and I built kind of this little, you know, it's a cart for like a mobile garage or an automotive garage, you know, just kind of a work cart, and just built this whole rig on top of it that I could wheel in my apartment. I just live in an apartment here, so we wheel it into our small little bathroom, and it took me years before I built up the courage to try that, because I don't know, as much as I embrace failure, I don't actively try and go out there and fail, you know, and And yeah, the printing aspect was just so terrifying to me, but it ended up being much easier than I anticipated once again. And being able to work an image within the darkroom, it's just so different of an experience. You know, there's a guy, Fan Ho. Some of your viewers might be familiar with him. He's a Chinese photographer. He passed away some years back, but incredible images. Most people know him. He would shoot in square format, and then he would do these very tall vertical croppings into the image. And he talked about the darkroom as the second decisive moment, obviously playing off of Bresson's decisive moment conversation there. And he would say that there's the initial decisive moment of finding the image out, you know, wherever you're hunting for the image, working that conversation there, if we continue that conversation language on. And then there's the second conversation and the second decisive moment that happens in the darkroom, to where it goes, okay, I've taken the initial shot, whether it's a snapshot, whether it's a deep, intimate conversation, and now it's going, how do I want to present that to others? How do I want to present it to myself? How does it need to be spoken of from here on out? And that's where dodging the burning comes in. That's when paper choice comes in. There's all sorts of different decisions that play into so much of what's going on in the image moving forward. You know, so having an image not end up as a print, you know, there's usefulness of it. You can put it up on Instagram and everything like that, but the visceral experience of being able to hold it in your hand, being able to put it up on a wall. We have different prints all around. I can like reach out at any, yes, exactly. At any given time, it's prints all around. Yes.
All kinds of prints, man. This is my girlfriend's daughter.
Oh.
This is actually Instax Mini that I shot with an RB67 and then scanned.
Wow.
And then made an 8x10 print of it. And it's
That's
like
amazing.
Yeah, that's Instax Mini. And
incredible.
so I think the limitations are so frequently in our heads.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? I had a number of people be like, how did you figure out that you could do that in an RB67? It was like, well, I just figured in my head that there's nothing holding me back from doing that.
Yeah.
It's got to be physically possible. If it can be exposed in a Polaroid camera, well, how different is an RB67?
Right.
I'm getting really into, it's funny that you talk about like intimacy. Mm-hmm. I view a big print as being way less intimate.
Yes.
Here's the reason behind it. When you have a 5x7, it's the type of thing you put in a small frame and you view it. You actually would hold it and view it. So I get that there's not as much detail. Okay, that the cliff that's there isn't going to be like, you know,
right.
But there's something behind that, and there's something behind putting it on your shelf and having it be something you can grab and hold.
Yes.
It doesn't just sit on the wall as this big piece that almost is furniture that gets kind of ignored. You've never really taken it and held it and loved it.
True.
So I have made a commitment now to only, or at least for this year and potentially next year, only do 4x5 contact prints on 5x7 paper. No enlargements whatsoever.
I love that.
Ed Weston did that. He did contact prints. And I think that's such a beautiful thing. The process of doing it is making me feel such an intimacy with the paper and the whole process. But I know you've done inkjet prints as well, right?
Yeah.
And I love
before we move
printing.
on to that, can I just, I don't know if you brought that up, because did you know that that's exactly where I've been as well? That I've just been doing contact prints?
I did not know that, no.
So I brought this down because I thought maybe we'd end up going into it. This is one of the pieces. I had 9 of these from my last exhibit, which was last year, and this is a finished 35 millimeter contact print. Did you
cut that mat yourself?
I had the mats cut it. Yeah, I have a mat cutter, but to try and cut such a small mat by hand is difficult.
So actually, now that you mention that, I thought it was more recent than that. Somebody mentioned that to me last year about the contact prints, because I've been trying to build and finish a darkroom for a while now in my home. A substantial darkroom to where I can actually have a lab and have people over here and teach them about darkroom photography and such. But with that said, yeah, I was like talking to, I think it was Travis Moritz about it, and he was like, yeah, you got to check out Nick's little prints.
Yeah.
And so I did take a look. That's awesome. I've been thinking about doing that with 120. In my head, I was like, it's too small, but like that's obviously not true.
Oh, it's amazing. And actually, I recently got rid of my Leica equipment, and like all of my film stuff is either on half frame or 645 6x6, and that's my intention is moving forward for the foreseeable future is just continuing to do these contact prints. But fully finished contact prints. I mean, I build these tiny little dodging and burning tools, and I'm split grade printing, and each print takes nearly an entire day to get to a place to where it actually is going to be a final print.
6 hours,
Yeah.
to do. Yeah. I did 10 of those. I'm doing a limited edition run of 100 prints of that, and then I'm never printing it again. So nice. I like the idea of retiring negatives. So it gets 100 prints, never gets printed ever again.
Sure.
For the fact that it'll keep me shooting.
Yeah.
I don't want to have to
keeps
like
you constantly creating new stuff.
Yeah, but with the mindset of like I'd like to top that print. I like that photo. It doesn't negate that photo as being a good photo. It's all subjective, but yeah, I like the idea of like, oh, I wonder if I could get a little more tonal range here. Like, what if I develop the negative a little bit different for the print this time? And, so how do you feel now about inkjet prints then? So that sounds like something maybe that you're not doing as much.
Well, I do both, and honestly, when I sold the Leica, I moved over to Fuji X Pro for a lot of my kind of everyday work. And especially because I've been wanting to get back into color studies and really kind of incorporating color back into my workflow. And I'm really excited about the color work that I'm making with that. And I have no interest of really getting into the darkroom and printing, actual color negatives onto color papers and all that kind of stuff. That's a whole different world that I'm completely unfamiliar with. But yeah, at the end of the day, as long as something gets into a printed format, I mean, when I do my zines, those aren't darkroom printed, although I've considered the concept of doing fully darkroom printed zines. But at the same time, I just don't have the time and capacity to be able to put towards it. So this week I was really kind of thinking through the aspect of how different I am than what somebody would call a quote unquote purist. And how I kind of move away from the purist aspect. There's certain areas within it that I would probably still hold true to what somebody might consider as a purist. But when it comes to printing and all those different aspects, I personally enjoy the darkroom. I personally really love the aspect of working a print, getting to the end of it, and just being proud of it, of going, that my hands touched this. I shaped the light that was going on this. But at the same time, I still get a very similar experience when I print out a beautiful inkjet print on, nice Hahnemühle, however people want to pronounce it, paper, and you hold that in your hand too. It's a same kind of visceral experience. You might not have the reward of the time and labor that went into it, but at the same time, when it comes to that, I've put a fair amount of time and labor into dodging and burning in Lightroom, and it might not be with my hands, but at the same time, I've still invested into it. So I prefer both, I have beautiful inkjet prints displayed on the walls, and then I have beautiful darkroom prints displayed on the walls. And I don't look at one and scoff at the other by any means.
Yeah, and then you mentioned like about being a purist. To me, and this might sound, this is all just opinions. I'm not telling people how to do anything.
Exactly.
But my opinion of a purist is somebody who's not open.
Right.
Because if you're only film, I have friends that take only digital images, and they do what I consider digital media. They don't print their images, and they have epic work. It's amazing. It's beautiful. Yeah. I really only view digital media as a proof of a print, a proof of something that will be an amazing print. So when I look at somebody's Instagram, I'm like, these are amazing proofs, and I think it's going to be an epic print. But it's weird for me thinking with the screen there being kind of like that's your final image. I want to hold it, and I can't. I don't know. That relation, I don't understand what's going on in the computer. I don't want anybody to have a limiting factor to be like, oh, I don't have a darkroom. So I don't have a darkroom like Dave's. I can't do this. Or, and it sounds like you yourself have a difficult setup being in an apartment. I have a 300 square foot detached garage on a, fairly decent sized property. So there's the limits are in our heads. And, yeah, I really would. I want people to just like make that step. Life's short. The last thing is like, what excites you most photographically, and how often do you shoot? Is shooting a daily thing for yourself, or like where do you draw inspiration? And I think that's an especially pertinent question right now because people are having a hard time finding things to shoot because they can't, like portrait artists like myself, I shoot a ton of portraits. I can't really go do that right now. So I've struggled with like, okay, what in my environment would I shoot? So like how do you start a day, and also do you shoot every single day, or how frequently are you shooting?
Yeah, during the quarantine, I've been shooting quite a bit more. Honestly, over the last, if you were to ask me this question a year and a half ago, it would have been a different answer. And even 2 years ago, it would have been a completely different answer. 2 years ago, I was going out every single day and shooting as much as I possibly could. Then over the last year and a half, it's kind of dwindled down. And then this year especially, I've shot stuff for family work, of just cataloging, time with my nieces, time with my bride, and then time with my students. I do some teaching. But then as far as the creative aspect and actually going out there and creating a body of work, I don't do it on a regular basis as much as I used to. So now it's kind of, I get an itch that needs to be scratched, and then I chalk some time off for it. I might take some time off from work. Over the last probably year and a half, most of my project-based work has been made during vacationing. So I'll travel out to New York, I'll travel out to Montana, or these are at least places that I have traveled, Chicago. We'll go up to what's called Traverse City up here. It's kind of our wine area. So there's tons of vineyards and everything up there. And I'll create more work during that. As far as what I look for in work and what inspires me, I like to at least think that I'm inspired by so much. I just really love the way I think light, shape. Like I said, I came from a graphic design background. There's so much shape and geometric play within my images. The rhythm and flow of a composition is really a big thing that I'm going for. So even if it's in a mundane kind of topic or subject that I'm shooting, if I could do it in a very rhythmic and balanced and composed way, I really enjoy that. So it honestly doesn't need to be something extraordinarily cool for me to really get excited about it. I recently had been walking around just our apartment complex and just catching light on, like vents on the side of an apartment, and just seeing how the light would cast down on shadows, and then the slats of the siding and how everything lines up just beautifully. That's cool for me. Then there's times where it's like, I just get into a street photography mode and I got to get out to Chicago or New York. And that's the only thing that's going to scratch that itch. So it's kind of a wide range of of topics, but
yeah,
it's a little bit.
It's like picking your next meal.
Right.
There's so many ingredients you could slap together, and sometimes maybe you try a little different ingredient, and you're like, "Oh, this tastes good," and then you crave that again the next time. Yeah, it's constantly evolving, and I'm happy to hear that. I want to compliment you on the geometry and composition in your photography. When I think of like parallel lines and like all these different things, and their perfect execution in photography, I think of your work. there'll be such a something that I feel like other people walk by every single day, and you'll turn the camera a little bit like this, and you're like, yep, and you shoot it, and that's
Sure.
just a beautiful thing. Something that like 1,000 people that day have walked past, you know.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So that's a beautiful thing, and I'm such a fan of your work. So thank you for taking this time.